Hello, everybody, and welcome to Big Bees, the podcast where we discuss everything SME. My name is Billy Bukako, and I am your host. I firstly want to thank you for tuning in today and all the messages of support we've been getting from social media. Your interaction, your likes, your shares with your neighbors, your bosses, your friends. Tell them all what is Estila. Thank you so much, colleagues. And today we are tackling a very sensitive issue. If you ask any entrepreneur what their biggest headache is, 99.9% of the time, they will tell you it's finance, right? Finance to start, finance to grow, finance to access markets, and sometimes finance to access finance. FinScope conducted a survey on small businesses in South Africa, and they have reported that 3%, only 3%, of SMEs have access to formal credit, 4% to informal credit, and about 93% never accessed any credit. The Banking Association of South Africa released a report in 2018 asserting that within the past 15 years, nothing significant has changed in the landscape of SME financing in the country. My guest today will be unpacking the SME financing phenomenon in South Africa. His name is Peter Serite, a chartered accountant. Okay. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, buddy.
Thank you for making time for us today. Would you spend a little bit of time just to tell us more about yourself? What is it that you do? And yeah.
No, fair enough. So I'm fortunate enough to be the MD of Azania Chartered Accountants. It's our 5th year running now. And what we do pretty much, we specialize in SME development financing, assurance audits, internal audits, and quite recently more into BEE and deal advisory.
Okay, that's quite interesting. I think you're the right person for us to be having this conversation.
Hopefully.
I think, what are your thoughts on SME financing in the country? How does the landscape look like?
Looking at the financial system, the traditional system, as rightfully as you said, the research showed that part hasn't changed in a while. Our traditional banks, our traditional lending system are still quite rigid in the approach, but we've seen an emergence of alternative financing, so venture capital, PE, BEE financing, grants, which again, as we are talking, would really look to unpack into it, which give a hint of some hope into the landscape of finance, especially for SMEs in SA.
Okay, so what would you say are the major factors that affect lending and access to finance in general? Looking at the fact that nothing has really changed dramatically in about 15 years.
Yeah.
What would be those factors that affect that?
So again, when we look at financing, there are two parts to it. There's the SME getting ready for financing, which again, my opinion is that there's a lot of underestimation that goes into it. Meaning, there's the SME getting ready for financing, getting their books ready. Do they want to follow an asset-based financing, meaning they need a strong balance sheet? Or is it pretty much an operational type of financing, which again, you need a bankable idea or scale rather. So again, the first part or the first argument is that our SMEs are not ready for financing. They're not banking ready. But then the second part is that even though with alternative funding, right, there's still an information gap between investors, i.e. funders, and what they are looking to deploy their capital to, and the SME's expectation in terms of this deployed capital. How do I then roll it out into the business? So there's still that gap of information and just the SMEs being ready, in my view.
Okay, you touch on two things, right? And the first one is investment readiness of the SMEs. And you'll often hear this when you talk to people from DFIs or any of the government agencies that are, mandated with SME finances. They'll often say that the rejection rate is quite high because of, the investment readiness part. But then you also touch again in terms of a gap. The expectation from the financier and, the expectation from the other side. How do you think we can bridge that gap?
So I think the gap, if you look across the country, there's been a deployment of incubators, ESDs, that really try to bridge that information gap. I mean, government is playing their part in really trying to get the information, right? But at the core of it, Billy, it goes to the entrepreneur in that what type of funding am I looking for? One, once I know that, how do I communicate that to my funders? For example, if I need funding to build, right? I have no business talking to people that are doing PO funding, right? So it's matching the funding that we also see that generally entrepreneurs, the first funding, and again, it has a lot of historical elements to it, our relationship with money, especially coming from Black business owners, right? We grew up in environments where the moment the bank approved, whatever the rate that is, you were happy to take that funding. And we're still seeing some of those habits perpetuate in business, where someone can get funding, but it's so costly, it outweighs the benefit of leveraging. So there's, firstly, the entrepreneurs needing to understand their business, what they're doing, and what a typical funder in that space is looking for. Right? And then secondly, because the stakeholders are playing their parts. We can't even say government is not doing enough advocacy. There are not enough incubators. There are not enough platforms for information. All of that is there. It's just now the entrepreneur internalizing it. For example, right now, if you had to take any business owner right there and ask them, what is the process for tendering? They'll be able to tell you, right? I need a CSD that's compliant. I need a tax clearance. I need this. But the question is, do they really understand why those information are required? What does a set of apps really communicate? What can you read from looking at it? Because often in our office, we'd get a client that literally would come in, drop bank statements and says the bank is looking for the apps. And I'm like, but you are not concerned. And it's like, no, I know how much I'm making, you know? So again, it goes to our business owners not being able to understand, actually, why is everyone fussing about a tax clearance? Why is everyone saying I need 3 months, 3 years audited financial statement? What is it on those documents that the funder is looking for? And how do I then improve those key indicators to show that even when a funder is looking at it, even if I don't meet the required amount for funding, they can see that I'm actually moving in the right direction.
So, I mean, having said what you said, it speaks directly to the criteria that is being used. Do you think, if you look at your traditional, funding instruments and the more recent ones that we've seen coming up, and you've touched on some of them, do you think the criteria that is used, speaks to the South African entrepreneur? Is it fair on them? Is it, because I get that there is a huge responsibility that you're placing on the entrepreneur, rightfully so, right? There is a role that as ESD practitioners, understanding that there is an information gap that you need to bridge as well. But in terms of the financiers themselves, that criteria, is it, realistic in terms of the landscape in South Africa?
My humble opinion, it can be definitely relaxed. It can be relaxed a bit. However, if you ask anyone from the banks, they'll tell you they do it to protect themselves. These are some of the tick boxes they need to have. Similarly with one of the entities, let's say from government, you're trying to raise funding, there'll be documents they need to have because it's process, right? But with that said, these documents are not impossible. Even if you look at globally, it's not like what they're asking for in SA, it's any unique to what they're asking for in the US, in the UK. It might be that the source of that information might be different, but any investor wants to know, how much did you make last year? Do you at least comply with the laws of that country? If you're employing people, how much are you paying? This is the same information they will need to ask. So in terms of the ask, I don't think the banks are being difficult. It's just that I guess definitely the process can be made a bit more liquid so that the ordinary entrepreneur can be able to access it without having to jump through hoops. Because at this point in time, you almost need to spend a bit of amount just to know how much you qualify from the bank. So definitely for starting entrepreneurs, smaller businesses, what we define as exempt micro entities, definitely that process can be eased a lot, but the requirements of it, they make sense if you had to ask me from what they're asking for.
Okay. And I think you touched on, various other countries and, likening what is happening in South Africa to the likes of the US. Are there any pockets of excellence outside of South Africa that maybe we can benchmark? Countries that are getting this financing, thing right. For instance, if you look at the top 3 challenges that are experienced by businesses I'm talking about America and the US. Top 3 from growth, maturity phase to scale-up phase. Finance is still a problem. Where can we look to as South Africans and say, let's benchmark. There's some pockets of excellence here and that we can adopt.
I mean, in all honesty, the traditional methods, I'd say they've taken a bit of a slag in adapting to global trends, but we've seen a huge spike in non-traditional. And that's where we start looking at sector financing. It's not quite common in SA. In SA, I guess what we see very common is what we call PE deals, right? So those generally, it would be easy to access into them. You come in at a discount because you meet certain criteria, right? And it gives you access to a good deal at lower rates, for lack of a better word. Then you also see in SA some of the things that work as your grants as part of ESG deliveries, where now larger corporates, they have to spend a portion of it in order to align to their PE strategy. And what that triggers is there needs to be some financial support, right? We see some of it coming through grants, and that's an easy one to tap in because there's no obligation for the business owner to repay it. We've also seen then coming up as well hybrid models, where it's an element of a grant pending meeting certain criteria, blended finance, yes. And those ones, again, still very reasonable rates. Asset financing, we see it coming through. So those are some of the type of non-traditional financing that we see building traction in the market, and entrepreneurs actually taking quite a lot of, right? And moving away from the traditional, I'm going to get non-secured funding. But also quite interesting has been the private equity or the venture capital space, which is a bit more risky, if you ask me, because it's almost, the capital is very patient, right? Because that is the problem on the other side, to say this capital needs to be paid after a defined period of time. Whereas the other band says, I'm going to relax a bit of my capital. However, my requirement as a venture partner, as a PE partner, becomes a lot more. I need to start seeing results almost immediately. And those type of businesses, we see a lot of deals taking place. However, the business owner, 3-4 years down the line, he is almost diluted to an 8%, 10%. He does not have a say. But it's because of all Series A funding, Series B, all of these stages of funding in order to scale. But the problem is the business fundamentally was never scaling. So those things have drawbacks, and those are things business owners need to be aware of,
Yeah, so safe to say maybe it is not an ideal situation, because we do see these venture capital deals, but very few and far in between. Would you say perhaps the risk aversity that is linked to it is what perhaps would send entrepreneurs away from?
It would be because I mean the culture again in SA of entrepreneurship, especially among Black owners, is I'm trying to build a legacy or something I can live off, right? Very, very seldom in SA markets you get a business owner that knows that after 5 years I'm going to sell this business. We all see ourselves growing old, our children coming into the business. So that methodology of thinking fundamentally goes against PE and your venture capital, because those, you're saying I'm bringing in experts that will help me scale the business to the next level. Once the business is at this level, we should be able to all exit with some margin. So now that's where the problem we see local, that now when the venture fund partner, the PE partner, it's time for them to exit. Firstly, the business owner does not want to leave that business because they've created an identity for themselves around that one. 2, they need to almost buy out these venture partners that have helped the business at now multiples of what they came in. So again, it's a very complex industry. I always say, so what generally happens to the local business owners, they end up just shying away from it. But it does work for certain businesses. And those are businesses where, as a business owner, you have identified, I need this particular set of skills. For example, you need to access global markets with globalization. Now you've seen that, okay, South Africa, we've covered it. Now I need to be able to have a partner that can give me access into European markets, American markets. And then you get a venture partner that for 5 years, they give you access But then you should know that how does the exit look like as a business owner? And quite often, a lot of our business owners don't think beyond that.
Yeah.
What does the succession plan looking like? Cool, I want to keep it into the business, in the family rather.
family.
Who is taking over? When do they come in? What do they need to study? And it's weird because globally we're seeing family businesses actually increase in trends. But then those conversations, you take an average person from a different area, they already understand that I'm actually going to finish my formal education, go to study and come back here. And that is just the mental shift we need to have in that space. Because we are not at a point where as South African business owner, we can say we're building family businesses or family industries rather.
It's almost a reconditioning. I think you and I will probably understand this, young black men who probably have a grandfather or great-grandfather who had cattle, right?
Yes.
There's all this livestock and the neighbors keep saying, that family is rich.
Yeah.
But you growing here, you're looking around, it's like, rich what?
Exactly.
Because you're holding up on all this because you have this thing of, giving off to your children, but not understanding that, these cattle, if you were, for instance, to send them off to an abattoir and you create that whole cycle, there could be literally, something to leave behind rather than just, having all these cattle getting old in your yard.
Absolutely.
I think you also touched on something quite important and at the center of these conversations. You talked about, we see year in, year out, corporates are reporting billions and billions in ESG spend, and most or some of that would end up, in exactly what you're saying, these affordable loans, grants, and stuff like that. Do you think as corporates, there is an understanding? Do you think the way that this, the disbursement of these funds is done, is it the right way? Is it, I think you see where I'm going with this one.
Because what makes it tricky, Billy, is keep in mind the two parties are not driving the same objective. You've got the corporate that needs to spend just enough for them to keep or maintain or improve the BEE. So the moment their BEE consultant says 200 million is the max, even if you have the best idea, it will need EXCO approval for us to spend more. So the spending of funds is not driven by the objective of the business owners. It's driven by purely to say, what does our BE strategy or our internal strategy looking like? Whereas for the business owners, and again, I'm not taking away from that still brings value into the ecosystem.
Sure.
It's just that the two parties don't have the same objectives. They are not driving the same agenda. Right? Because as a business owner now, whether you as a small business owner needed just 10 more million to hit scalability, if I've reached my BE cap, catch it next year. You get.
And I don't care what happens.
You get. So that's the first
not
one.
My monkey, not my circus.
And the second part is, if you look a bit on the history of incubators, right, you'll see this is a model that, particularly in our continent, is fairly new. So the deployment of these funds is something that's quite new to everyone. Previously, you look 10 years, 15 years ago, how the industry looked. There would be a donor, a foundation from the USA that will send dollars to, and then they were more socially driven. We give you money to feed the poor, to build this. But now we're actually giving money to entrepreneurs to say, go replicate. But because it's a grant as well, the responsibility of how to manage it, we're still seeing a lot of defaults. Even though it's a grant, we're still seeing a lot of entrepreneurs get the money. If it was individuals, would say, I blew it, right? But because they move from ESD to ESD to ESD, an entrepreneur over the period of 5 years has gotten in excess of 5 million from different ESDs, but to this day cannot show you an asset that they've acquired. So there's a lot of education we still need to do behind the scenes, especially tying it to the funding. What I've seen some programs get right is, included with this fund, as they are unlocking the batches, they are requiring certain milestone in terms of knowledge and understanding of financials. So maybe phase 1 could be you submitting your financials. Phase 2 of the funds, you need to actually have an outsourced accountant you come to this meeting with. Phase 3, you need to have an in-house accountant that's running your finance function, because The logic behind it is, as you're getting this money, it's capacitating you. So you need a lot more accountability. You need to report more to funders. Because I always say to any business owner that has come to my office that there is no one that is just going to give you money and walk away and not want to know what happened to it. How did you manage it? And that is just a little bit of accountability that we need to see coming out of our business owners. But in terms of how the funds are distributed, corporates just also need to just move away from socially distributing the funds. Let's have pure KPIs to say an eligible business for an ESD grant should be one that's doing this, and not merely as a tick box exercise.
That is truly a mouthful. And I think maybe just one question on that. Do you think the incubation model, right, and incubators in general are better equipped to, bridge this communication gap between, obviously as a corporate, as you said, I want the points, right? And that's the objective. And the business has a different objective. Do you think the incubation model is better equipped, perhaps, to sort of find the common ground between the two?
I mean, it's not perfect like any other model, but history and evidence show that countries that have adopted incubation model, right, and adopted it at scale, it does move the needle. It does the impact, because you have centers that are specializing in deploying funds, supporting these entrepreneurs, engaging stakeholders, dealing with unemployed grads, because that's another pandemic we're not even looking at. So incubators become sort of a heart of this that deals with all of these needs in one place. We haven't gotten that model right, but the reality of it is this model is quite new to our continent. If you look at where it's been deployed, I mean, you look at what it has done to the economy of China, then it's just purely incubation models. At some point in time, they could record over 12,000 active incubators across the country, right? And we're still sitting, I mean, if my numbers are correct, throughout SA, we're still under 270, both private and public incubators. We haven't even hit the thousands, right? In some countries in Africa, they only have one. We're helping in Malawi deploy one that was the first of its kind. You understand that it's still quite a new concept, still going to be met with a lot of political challenges and our infrastructure challenges, because even the model of incubators moved from brick and mortar, I've got office spaces, entrepreneurs come in to say, actually, we need to give value. How do we support an entrepreneur in the Northern Cape virtually, but still make sure we deliver value to them? So even that model is changing quite rapidly. But again, for this eco space of SMEs, unemployment, social issues, we can't have one driver. It can't just be incubators. We need the voice of corporate. We need the voice of government. We need even political parties to play a space. The educational sectors, quite brilliant work that's happening within the TVETs to start actually starting incubators within the TVETs to really say, how do we drive this entrepreneurial ecosystem, culture, spirit from that grassroots? So I'd say when we look at our context as SA, and the incubation model is still by far the best that we can adopt, still by far the best that we can derive value out of. It has its drawbacks, but it works.
It works. I think my last question for you is, I mean, we both live in South Africa, and I'm sure we've heard so many statements, the government must, the government is not doing this, right? And now we've got government agencies that are mandated to deploy, SME financing. What is your government must? If anyone is listening now from a government agency that is, tasked with, it's supposed to be a DFI or an agency, what do you think needs to change in that space?
So for me, contrary to popular belief, the policies, the government's efforts are perfect. What needs to happen is our entrepreneurs needs to be taught on how to build bankable businesses. How to drive profitability and self-fund. Like, yes, we are unpacking the funding model, but at the core, if you're running a business that is profitable on its own, if you're running a business that's able to give accountability on how it's spent and made the money, no bank will turn you away. But because a lot of our businesses find themselves in an area, he has not been trading, he needs hence effectively he needs this, then that's where then a lot of these asks are from government. But government's job is merely to create an environment where business can live, government can prosper, and all South Africans have an opportunity. So from where I'm standing, government has done a lot. Maybe it might be that the advocacy of it, the message hasn't gone out there enough, but we look at the funds they have, both direct investments, indirect, the investments and the supports just they're doing for SME. For me, it's a lot. What just needs to happen is we need to start focusing on the entrepreneurs. How do we get quality entrepreneurs out of our education system, out of our township markets, out of our homeland situation to say, I can be an entrepreneur in Limpopo and still be able to play in a big value chain that supplies ShopRite in Cape Town. So that's for me where the issue lies. Nothing wrong with government.
Peter, thank you so much for coming on to the show. You and I are both ESD practitioners, and you know the issue of MOVs, right? So in the show, as part of my MOV, I would like you to sign this and we immortalize this moment in the picture today. Please sign that for me. Thank you. And this is a small token of our appreciation. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it from us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please go through our social media pages, leave us your comments, like, share, and give us all the feedback that you need. Also, just one more time, if you like what we're doing here and you'd like us to carry on doing it, please do hit us on our email. Let's talk about how we can make this podcast go further than the four pilot episodes that we're shooting. Once again, my name is Billy Bukako, and this was Big Bees.